Hello, and welcome to Principles of Macroeconomics. Today we'll be talking about trade, specialization, and gains from trade. So to start off with, when we think about the ways that an economic agent can satisfy their needs and wants, they have two choices. The first is economic self-sufficiency, so that everything that you want to consume, you have to provide for yourself. You have to produce all of the goods and services that you plan on consuming. The other is specialization in trade, so that an economic agent focuses on producing one good that they are relatively good at producing, and they trade that good for all of the other goods and services that they want to consume. What we will see is that gains from trade allow us to consume more without working more. Let's use an example to specifically understand gains from trade and specialization. So in this example, we're going to have two economic agents. We're going to have a seamstress and a baker, and they are going to produce two goods, bread and sweaters. Here we can see the time that it takes to produce one unit. So we see for the seamstress, she takes 60 minutes to produce one loaf of bread, and it takes her 120 minutes to produce one sweater. For the baker, it takes him 20 minutes to produce one loaf of bread and 60 minutes to produce one sweater. Now, how much bread and how many sweaters can each agent produce if they dedicate an entire day to the production of each good? We're going to assume that they work 8 hours in one day. So what do we have to do here? So we take the amount that they can produce in one 8-hour day. So for bread, we're going to take the 60 minutes that it takes her in 1 hour, divided by the total amount of time that it takes her to make one loaf of bread, 60 minutes, multiplied by 8 hours, she can make 8 loaves of bread. Also, in 1 hour, it takes her 120 minutes to produce one sweater. So in 8 hours, she can produce 4 sweaters. For the baker, it takes him 20 minutes to produce one loaf of bread. So we take 60 divided by 20, multiplied by 8 hours, and that gives us 20 loaves of bread. Takes him 60 minutes to produce one sweater, so that he can produce 8 sweaters in a 1 hour day. So based on this information, who is better at producing bread and who is better at producing sweaters? Well, we see that if we compare the production of bread, the baker can produce more bread than the seamstress. So the baker is better at making bread. If we look at the production of sweaters, the seamstress can produce 4 and the baker can produce 8. So again, the baker is better at producing sweaters. Here we can say that the baker has an absolute advantage in the production of both goods. He is better in absolute terms at producing bread than the seamstress, and he's better in absolute terms at producing sweaters than the seamstress. But can they gain from trade? We will go into that. So let's assume first that they're evenly splitting their time between the production of both goods. How much can they consume? So here we have their production possibility frontier for the baker and the production possibility frontier for the seamstress. This is the total amount that they can produce in one 8-hour day. Now, if they are economically self-sufficient, their production possibility frontier will be equal to what we call their consumption possibility frontier. Which is the total amount that they can consume of each good. So if they split their time evenly, the baker is going to produce 12 loaves of bread and 4 sweaters, and the seamstress is going to produce 4 loaves of bread and 2 sweaters. Now, what we can see here is that we can calculate the opportunity cost. So remember, the opportunity cost is what you give up to get something. The opportunity cost for the seamstress to produce one additional loaf of bread is that she will have to give up half a sweater. For the seamstress to produce one additional sweater, she needs to give up producing 2 loaves of bread. For the baker to produce one additional loaf of bread, he needs to give up 1/3 of a sweater. To produce one additional sweater, he has to give up 3 loaves of bread. Now, how do we calculate that? Well, let's see here. So the seamstress can produce 8 loaves of bread or 4 sweaters. So we want to know, if she produces one additional loaf of bread, how many sweaters does she need to give up? So that's going to tell us that she can produce 1 bread or half a sweater. That's how we get the opportunity cost. The same thing will be true for our baker. So for our baker, what we will see is that he can produce 24 bread or 8 sweaters. So to understand how much sweaters he has to give up to produce an additional loaf of bread, we divide through by 24 so that we see he can produce 1 bread or 1/3 of a sweater. And that's how we get the opportunity costs. So when we look at this, what we see is that the seamstress has a lower opportunity cost in producing sweaters, and the baker has a lower opportunity cost in producing bread. So the opportunity cost will determine specialization. The seamstress is going to specialize in producing sweaters because she has to give up less bread to produce 1 additional sweater. And the baker is going to produce bread because he has to give up less sweaters to produce 1 additional loaf of bread. So now, what if they decide to trade? Let's say that the baker will spend 5 hours on making bread and 3 hours on sweaters, whereas the seamstress is going to spend all 8 hours on making sweaters. We want to know, how much will they produce, how much will they consume, and do they gain from this trade? So the amount that they produce, seamstress spends all of her time on sweaters. She makes 4 sweaters. Baker spends 5 hours on bread. He makes 15 loaves of bread. He spends 3 hours on sweaters. He makes 3 sweaters. Now we're going to say that they trade 2 sweaters for 5 loaves of bread. How much will they consume? So we take the amount that they produce, 0 bread and 4 sweaters for the seamstress, 15 bread and 3 sweaters for the baker, and subtract or add the amount that they trade. So for the seamstress, she gives up 2 sweaters and she gains 5 bread. So she ends up with 5 breads and 2 sweaters. On the other hand, the baker gives up 5 bread and he gains 2 sweaters. So he ends up consuming 10 bread and 5 sweaters. Have they gained from this trade? Well, let's compare what they consume with what they can produce. So if we look back, the baker produces 15 loaves of bread and 3 sweaters. So he's producing 15 bread and 3 sweaters. We'll call this point P on the production possibility frontier. The seamstress is producing only sweaters. We'll call this point P. Now, how much are they consuming? The baker consumes 10 bread and 5 sweaters. So he is consuming 10 bread and 5 sweaters. We'll call this point C. And the seamstress is consuming 5 bread and 2 sweaters. And this will be point C. We see that they gain from trade because they can consume more than they can produce on their own. So they are still working an 8-hour day, but they are consuming more than what they could produce on their own in that 8-hour day. Now, let's talk about comparative advantage. Comparative advantage is related to opportunity costs. And we have already decided who has the lowest opportunity cost in the production of each good. The agent with the lower opportunity cost will produce a good and have a comparative advantage in that good. So for the seamstress, she has a comparative advantage in the production of sweaters, because to produce one more sweater, she only has to give up 2 bread. Whereas the baker, for him to produce one more sweater, he has to give up 3 bread. On the other hand, the baker has the comparative advantage in the production of bread because he only has to give up 1/3 of a sweater, whereas the seamstress has to give up half a sweater. Now, no single agent will have a comparative advantage in both goods. As long as the opportunity costs between the two agents differ in the production of the two goods, then they have room to gain from trade. Thank you so much for joining me in this module on gains from trade and specialization.